December 31st, 1999, 11:45 p.m. Hold still, the flash sucks in this light. Sarah adjusted the Polaroid camera while Michael posed against his car, a beat-up Mustang he swore would be a BMW by graduation. The flash caught his Letterman jacket, the gold embroidery slightly frayed but still proud. Future business leader of America, everyone, David teased from where he sat sketching in his notebook. The paint stained his jeans, evidence of another late night in the art room. Better get his autograph now, before he's too important for us little people. Rachel looked up from her Yale acceptance letter. 2 weeks old, but still carried everywhere. Please, Michael will always need someone to remind him he peaked in high school. Just wait, Michael grinned, that confident smile that got him out of detention and into parties. 5 years from now, I'll be running my own company. 10 years, you'll all be working for me. Some of us have actual dreams, Jessica said sarcastically. Not everyone wants to be a soulless corporate drone. Everyone remember the pact. Sarah pulled her coat tighter, breath fogging in the cold. We'd open at New Year's Eve 2024 no matter what. 25 years, Rachel mused, still holding her letter. I'll be done with residency by then, probably running my own research lab. Investigative journalist, Jessica declared, scribbling in her ever-present notebook. Breaking stories that matter, giving voice to people who need it. Still a dreamer. Michael rolled his eyes, but his smile was fond. He'd known Jessica since 3rd grade, back when she'd convinced him to help her rescue baby birds that had fallen from their nest. While you're all chasing dreams, I'll be making real money. David looked up from his sketchbook. There's nothing real about shuffling papers in some corporate office. Says the guy who thinks he can make a living painting pretty pictures. Michael shot back. Hey! Sarah stepped between them, a practiced peacemaker. Not tonight, okay? This is supposed to be special. Tom sat apart from the others, watching. He always watched. The Polaroid camera in his hands was his Christmas present to himself, saved up from months of weekend work at his uncle's garage. He raised it now, catching Sarah in profile as she mediated in another Michael-David argument. You're sure this spot is safe? Rachel asked, ever practical. The capsule won't get dug up by landscapers or something? Behind the baseball field under the oak tree. Sarah shook her head. Nobody comes here except us. It's perfect. Remember 8th grade? Jessica grinned. When Michael tried to convince Jenny Palmer he was the star pitcher? Hey, it worked, Michael protested. Until she came to a game, David snorted. Didn't she dump your ass right there in the bleachers? They all laughed, even Michael. It was easier to laugh tonight, with the old millennium dying and the new one full of promise. Even their usual tensions felt softer, worn smooth by shared history and the magic of a New Year's Eve. Tom's camera clicked again, capturing Michael mid-laugh, his guard down for once. Different from his posed shots. More real, more vulnerable. The way Tom always saw him beneath the ambition and swagger. Okay, everyone write their predictions. Sarah passed out paper and pens. Where we'll be in 25 years. CEO of my own company, Michael said immediately, scribbling. World-changing medical research, Rachel added. Art shows in Paris. David smiled, already sketching in the margins of his paper. Investigative journalist for the New York Times, Jessica declared. Breaking stories that matter, giving voice to people who need it. Taking care of the store, Sarah shrugged. Someone has to. Tom wrote nothing, just watched through his viewfinder as his friends dreamed out loud. The flash caught each moment. Rachel's quiet confidence, Jessica's boundless enthusiasm, David's artistic focus, Michael's burning ambition, Sarah's steadfast loyalty. None of them noticed him slipping away briefly, returning with the photos slightly thicker than when he'd taken them. If anyone had looked closely, they might have seen him writing something on the backs, his face unreadable in the darkness. The night air crackled with possibility of that peculiar energy of endings and beginnings. Y2K panic had emptied the streets. Everyone else was either hunkered down waiting for civilization to collapse, or partying like it would. But here, in their spot behind the baseball field, the world felt smaller, more intimate. Remember when we found this place? Jessica asked, hiding from Principal Matthews after the paint incident. The paint incident? Michael groaned. You mean when David convinced us to improve the school mascot? That eagle needed personality, David grinned. And you didn't exactly need convincing, Mr. Student Body President. God, Matthews was so mad, Rachel laughed. His face was redder than the paint. Sarah pulled her knees to her chest, sitting on the cold ground. Remember how Tom just appeared out of nowhere with the perfect alibi for all of us? They all looked at Tom, who shrugged and kept taking photos. He'd always been their guardian angel, always in the right spot at the right time with the right solution, quietly solving problems before they became disasters. The time he'd talked the security guard out of calling the police when Michael broke into the school to change a grade. The morning he showed up with coffee and a shoulder for Rachel after her MIT rejection. Little moments of salvation, never mentioned again. We should include something from that day, Jessica said suddenly, digging in her bag. She pulled out a small paint-stained feather, red and gold, the school colors they'd used on the eagle. For luck, you know. Michael checked his watch. 15 minutes till midnight. We should bury it soon if we want to start the millennium, right? Since when are you superstitious? David asked, but he was already helping Sarah dig the hole deeper. I'm not, Michael said. I just believe in getting timing right. Every future businessman needs to keep timing in mind. Everything's about business with you lately, David cut in. What happened to the guy who used to help me paint sets for drama club? He grew up, Michael snapped. Maybe you should try it. Hey, Sarah stepped between them again. Save it for 2024, okay? Tonight's about memories, not fights. Tom's camera caught the moment. Sarah mediating, David and Michael glaring past her, Rachel and Jessica exchanging worried looks. The flash made them all blink, breaking the tension. Fine, David muttered, but I'm not working for his company in 25 years. Please. Michael's smile returned, sharp-edged now. You'll be begging for a job once you realize that art doesn't pay bills. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Sarah glanced at her watch. We should get this done before the storm hits. They gathered around the hole they'd dug, deeper than necessary, maybe, but it had felt important somehow. The metal box, stolen from the art room's supply closet, sat ready to receive their offerings. Okay, final check, Rachel said, organized as always. Photos, predictions, the eagle feather, what else? This. David pulled a folded piece of paper from his sketchbook. A rough charcoal drawing of all 6 of them caught in a moment of laughter. Did it last week during study hall? You made me look fat, Michael complained, but he was smiling. That's your ego taking up space, David shot back, no real heat in it. Jessica added her reporter's notebook, dog-eared and filled with their stories from senior year. My first real interviews, she said. All of you talking about your dreams, your fears. Thought it might be interesting to see if any of it comes true. Please, Michael scoffed. In 25 years, we'll probably be able to do it all with computers. Technology, guys. It's the future. No one will even read actual books or newspapers anymore. Speaking of technology, Rachel pulled out a small glass vial, a sample from my AP Bio final project. The cell response rates were interesting. Dr. Matthews thinks I'll be a great researcher and cure diseases one day. Still trying to save the world, Michael said, but his tone was gentle. Sarah added her father's old brass store key. First one he ever gave me. Says I'll need it someday when I take over. You're really staying? Jessica asked. What about college? Community college, Sarah shrugged. Someone has to keep the store running while Dad handles the books. Can't all chase dreams to New York or California. Tom's camera caught her expression, pride mixed with something like resignation. He'd been shooting non-stop, though no one had really noticed. Each flash preserved a moment. Michael's flash of concern at Sarah's words, Rachel clutching her vial like it held more than just cells, David adding final touches to his sketch even as he placed it in the box. Your contribution, Tom? Rachel asked. He held up his camera questioningly. No way, Jessica protested. That's your Christmas present to yourself. You saved for months. Tom shrugged and lowered the camera into the box as Michael reached for his wallet. Here. He pulled out several crisp bills. Take it. Buy yourself a new one tomorrow. Always throwing money at problems, David muttered, but there was more worry than criticism in his voice. As they lowered the box into the hole, the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating their faces in brief, stark flashes that rivaled Tom's camera. Wait, Michael said suddenly. He pulled a business card from his wallet, fresh and crisp. Future business leaders of America embossed in gold. David rolled his eyes, but Sarah noticed how carefully he placed the card in the box, smoothing its corners first. The cold rain fell harder as they covered the box, taking turns with the shovel. Rachel marked the spot with the flat stone they'd chosen, while Jessica scattered leaves to hide the freshly turned earth. They worked together with the easy rhythm of people who knew each other's movements by heart. "There," Sarah said finally, patting the earth one last time. "See you in 25 years. "We should make a pact," Jessica suggested, rain plastering her hair to her face. "All of us, right here, no matter what. December 31st, 2024. "I'll probably be too busy running my empire," Michael joked, but his smile faded when no one laughed. "Promise," Rachel said firmly, extending her hand palm down. One by one, they placed their hands on top of hers. Midnight and 5 minutes. Michael checked his watch. "Party at my house? My parents are in Aspen," and I swiped some champagne from the cellar. They turned to go, but Tom lingered, watching their footprints slowly fade from the mud as the rain washed away all trace of their presence. All trace except what lay beneath the earth, waiting. In the years that followed, their paths diverged in ways none of them could have predicted that rainy December night. Michael's rise through this corporate world was meteoric, Lifeguard Insurance becoming one of the fastest-growing healthcare companies in the country under his leadership. Sarah kept her father's store running through changing times, watching Main Street transform as corporate chains replaced family businesses one by one. Rachel's promising career in medical research led her to breakthrough discoveries, though the politics of healthcare would eventually silence her findings. David's art found unexpected purpose in hospice centers, his portraits capturing final moments for families facing impossible losses. Jessica built an online support network for patients navigating the healthcare system, watching helplessly as options disappeared one by one. And Tom? He watched. He documented. He kept every newspaper clipping, every article, every photo. He tracked their lives from a distance, seeing patterns they couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. Until finally, as 2024 approached, he knew it was time for the truth to surface. None of them had spoken to each other in years, except Sarah, who somehow maintained connections with them all, but they remembered their pact. And as December 31st, 2024 approached, they each received a simple message from Tom. Just a photo of their teenage selves standing around a freshly buried box and coordinates to the old baseball field. "Everyone remember the pact?" Sarah pulled her coat tighter, breath fogging in the cold. "We'd open at New Year's Eve, 2024, no matter what." Michael checked his Rolex. "Can we get on with this? Some of us have places to be." "Still a dick," David muttered, just loud enough to hear. He hadn't looked at Michael since they'd arrived, hadn't spoken to any of them in years except Sarah. Rachel knelt by the spot, brushing away dead leaves. The marker stone should be here. Her fingers found the edge of the flat rock they had used to mark the burial site. "Tom, you brought the shovel, right?" Tom nodded, quiet as ever, and started digging. He'd been the one to suggest burying the time capsule back in '99, though none of them could quite remember whose idea the Polaroids had been. The metal box emerged from the earth like a secret refusing to stay buried. Sarah brushed dirt from its surface, revealing the words they'd scratched into the lid. Y2K time capsule. Open December 31st, 2024, The Breakfast Club. God, we were pretentious. Rachel laughed, but it sounded forced. Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. "Look, can we just—" "Your company can survive an hour without you," Sarah snapped. "You owe us that much at least." The word company hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah pulled out a Swiss Army knife, the same one they'd used to scratch their message into the lid all those years ago. The hinges creaked as she worked them loose. Inside, 5 Polaroid photos lay on top, partially obscuring notes and trinkets beneath. Each photo showed one of them as teenagers, faces full of certainty about the futures they'd planned. "God, look how young we were." Sarah picked up the first photo. Michael in his Letterman jacket, that cocky smile unchanged by time. She turned it over absently, then froze. "Wait, what is this?" "What?" Michael reached for the photo. Sarah's voice shook as she read, "Fortune 500 CEO by 40, lives in glass tower overlooking Atlanta. Everything he touches turns to gold. The cost is higher than he thinks." Michael's smile faltered slightly. "That's not... We didn't write those." Rachel grabbed her photo, flipping it over. Her younger self wore a Yale sweatshirt, already dreaming of medical school. Her hands trembled as she read the back. "Discovers breakthrough treatment. Loses everything to prove it works. Truth buried under profit. Watches others pay the price." The color drained from her face. How did you know?" She looked at Tom, but he just stared at the ground, shoulders hunched against the December wind. Jessica snatched her photo next, hands shaking. Her teenage self beamed from the center of a crowd, yearbook in her hands. She flipped it, already knowing she'd find something written there. Builds network for the sick and dying. Connects thousands seeking hope. Watches his options disappear one by one. Their blood on his hands. The treatment centers, she whispered, looking up at Michael. All those people, that was you. Years of suspicion crystallized into certainty. Sarah stared at her own photo. Her teenage self leaning against her father's hardware store, rolling her eyes at having to work there. Her hands trembled as she turned it over. Stays when she meant to leave. Pays debts that aren't hers. Watches father die waiting for approval. Keeps his promises anyway. Dad's heart attack, Sarah's voice cracked. The claim denial... It was your company? Michael straightened his tie, a nervous habit from board meetings. Look, Lifeguard has policies. I don't personally review... 6 months of appeals, Sarah's voice cracked, each time with a different excuse. More documentation needed. Under review. Pending approval. Until finally, she met Michael's eyes. Did you know your company has a term for it? Death by delay. It's right there in the internal memos. My daughter. David's voice cut through the cold air. He hadn't touched his photo yet. It lay in the box, face down, like an accusation waiting to be read. David, I never knew it, Michael started. 8 years old. David's words fell like stones. The treatment existed, it worked, but your company... He finally reached for his photo, the last one. Don't, Michael said softly. The Polaroid showed David in the art room, paint splattered and smiling, a lifetime before cancer took his little girl. No one breathed as he turned it over. David stared at the back of his photo, his hands shaking so badly Sarah had to read it for him. Paints portraits of the dying. Watches his daughter fade. Begs for treatment that exists. Learns how cheap a life can be. $300,000, David's voice shook. That's what the treatment would have cost your company. 1/4's bonus for you. But your company said it wasn't cost-effective to cover experimental treatments, didn't it? Even when the data showed that they worked? Michael took a step back. The treatment wasn't approved yet. The liability? It worked in Europe! Rachel cut in. I had the data, the studies. Mortality rates dropped by 83% in the trial groups. Your company didn't just bury my research, you made sure no one would fund similar studies. How many children died while you were protecting your profits? You don't understand, Michael's voice cracked. The shareholders. Shareholders? Jessica laughed bitterly. I watched my support groups empty out one by one. Treatment centers closing, medications are becoming unavailable. Every time I tried to help people find options, your company was there, closing doors. Sarah picked up her father's photo again. He waited 6 months for approval, 6 months of appeals while his heart got weaker. The stress alone. Tom moved quietly during their confrontation, unnoticed as always. He pulled something from the box, the Polaroid camera they'd used 25 years ago. You want to know the real cost? David stepped toward Michael. Come see her room, still exactly how she left it. Her art supplies, her stuffed animals, her... His voice broke. Her Christmas presents, and I never got to give her. The flash of Tom's camera startled them all. The camera whirred, spitting out a fresh Polaroid. Tom waited for it to develop, his face unreadable as the others turned to stare at him. What are you doing? Sarah asked, but Tom just watched the image appear. Dark at first, then clearing, all of them caught in that moment of confrontation. David's grief and rage, Michael's fear, the others' dawning horror at how their lives had twisted together. Without a word, Tom placed the new photo face down in the disturbed earth. Something metal glinted as he set it atop the photograph. A revolver, old but well-maintained. Tom? Michael's voice shook. What is this? Tom stepped back, looked at each of them in turn. For the first time all evening, he spoke. Some predictions right themselves. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the growing dark. Sarah moved first, reaching for the photo. Rachel grabbed her wrist. Wait. David stared at the gun, then at Michael. What does it say? Don't, Rachel pleaded. We don't have to... Read it! David's voice was eerily calm. Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up the photo, careful not to touch the gun. She turned it over. 2 names were written in Tom's precise handwriting, followed by a time. Michael or David, 11:59 p.m. 1 bullet ends it all. The winter wind rustled through dead leaves, carrying the distant sound of New Year's celebrations. In just a few minutes, the prediction would either come true, or someone would choose to break the pattern. The gun waited, cold and patient in the growing dark. $300,000, David's voice shook with rage. That's what my daughter's life was worth to your company. To you. You don't understand corporate liability. Michael straightened his tie again, his CEO mask slipping back into place. The treatment wasn't approved. The risks. Risks? David stepped forward. My 8-year-old daughter was dying. What risk could be worse than that? The company had policies. Policies! David's laugh was hollow. You wrote the policies, Michael! You made the rules that killed her! Michael's face hardened. Maybe if you'd had better insurance, or if you'd noticed the symptoms sooner. Don't you dare! David's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Don't you dare try to blame me for this! I'm just saying. As a father, you had options, second mortgages, loans. Michael's corporate mask cracked slightly, desperation seeping through. You could have found the money if you'd really tried. The words hung in the air like poison. Found the money? David's hands clenched into fists. I sold everything, my car, my studio, my parents' wedding rings. I begged your company. And your company. His voice broke. Sent me a form letter. We regret to inform you. It wasn't personal. Michael took a step back, glancing at the gun. David, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearer than I have in years. David's grief crystallized into something harder, colder. You let her die to protect your profit margins. That's not... Michael's hand moved toward the gun, fear finally breaking through his corporate veneer, David racing him to it. The Polaroid camera whirred suddenly, startling them all. No one had touched it, but somehow it was taking one final picture. The shot rang out across the baseball field, echoing off the old oak tree. No! Sarah's scream cut through the night. Oh, God, no! Rachel's hands flew to her mouth. What have you done? You monster! Jessica's reporter's instinct made her watch as the Polaroid slowly developed in the winter air, even as tears streamed down her face. The image emerged gradually. First shadows, then shapes, then... The wind caught the photo before it fully developed, carrying it away into the darkness. Behind them, the New Year's bells began to toll midnight. Tom's final prediction had written itself.